1 2 1 2 tasting. Tasting 1, 2. Tasting, tasting.
very important voice here. I'd really like to welcome you all here tonight. Thank you. Oh, the whistle's gone. Oh, thanks, Joe. Thanks, guys. I just want to thank you all very much for coming this evening on a cold night like tonight to hear some, I think, very useful information for all of us here. The South African Warm Blood Society has waited a couple of years to get someone of this standing to come and inspect our horses, and I think I can say he's enjoyed his visit. He's enjoyed seeing the horses, and he has mentioned that the improvement from the last time he came is quite marked. So well done, everybody. We think we've been going in the right direction. And we were supposed to have someone else to tell you a little bit more about Arnaud Evain, but I think I'm going to actually leave him to explain what he does and who he is himself. But also, I just want to thank Frances for all the hard work that she's done and to put this together. And she has an amazing family and a daughter-in-law, Bronwyn, who has gone a long way to helping this happen. Amelia has been outstanding, her backing on putting these sort of evenings together, and I hope that a lot of you saw our recent virtual show with the young stock, and that was really all Amelia's, she instigated that last year, and I think it's proven to be very successful. So, thank you, Amelia, well done. And thank you to Joe and Johan, who's unfortunately not with us this evening, for allowing us to use their wonderful venue and for the fantastic area today, the arena, and all the hard work that you guys put into the sport. Arnaud, please, take over.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mindy, for making, and Francis, to make it this first part of the stay, because still one more day to go, so enjoyable. So I briefly introduce myself. I'm still active in two fields of the horse industry. One is the breeding activities with Groupe France Élevage, which is a private company owned by breeders in France. It was created 20 years ago to develop my activities of producing stallions, which I started 40 and something years ago. And my other activity is being a member of the sales, fences sales, which are presenting, we said, the best of the 3 results we can find in Europe for 34 years now in Fontainebleau every year. So the discussion tonight is about, can we find a simple answer to a question that we have all in mind? How can we predict the ability to perform to a sport horse? We're all breeders, so we're all starting from a dream to match a mare and a stallion. We end up with a foal, and would like very much to know as soon as possible what this foal is going to be able to achieve in the sport. Of course, it's not an easy question, and as you guess, it's not an easy answer, but we're going to try tonight to go a little bit further in the reflection and the process of thinking on how can we predict the ability of a horse to jump. So if we move to the next, this is an empty screen where the ability to jump, which will go from, I'll try to point with that, from low to high, and that we can measure from the birth up to the age of 6, because around 6, 7, the answer starts to be clear for the owner of the horse, is made of genetic factors and environmental factors, and it's a combination of the two which will end up in a result of a sport career. if we move to the next, some of the trajectory from 6 months to 6 years are very easy. We start very poor and end up very poor. Or start very promising and ends up very promising. If that were all like that, it would be easy to predict. But, and that's the next picture, some of the past are different. You can start with a poor expectation, and when the horse will develop, it will become a much more promising a young horse, and some very promising one for a various number of reasons can end up with a very poor result. They can be physical reasons, they can be accident, part of genetic, part of environment, but those trajectories are possible. Those two are easy, but it can be even more complicated in the next frame. They can go from poor to high, back to poor, or high to poor and back to high, everything. And if we move to the next one, you can know very quickly in which direction you go. You can also happen to know at the very end that a very promising 4 years old end up as a poor 6 years old, or that an average 4 years old end up as a promising 6 years old. We all know horses which have followed one of those paths. So far, more questions and no answers. 3 phases of explanation of how we end up with the final results. As the breeding part, that's your job, creating a foal. Then the training part, which takes place from the birth, because the training starts at the birth, to the competing phase of the career. And so we have back to the poor who stays poor, to the great who stays great, and all the other forms of paths that we have seen, which are the results of the genetic factors and the environmental factors. So now we have settled the problem. Very complicated. We haven't found any solution to predict from where to go, from where to land. We have carried a lot of studies in various stud books in Europe about what's the part of the genetic and the part of the environment in the final results. We take as a final results the prize money earned in competition by the horses, saying that we can say that a career with a lot of prize money can be considered as more successful as a career with a little prize money, which is something we can discuss about, because the truth is the smile of the rider or the smile of the owner. And some owners or riders are pleased with a very nice 4 foals, comfortable, rather than with the first prize. But we took as a measurement the prize earned in competition. And with the big data that we have accumulated in the last 50 years, we can end up with some certitudes that the conformation, the gaits, the natural jumping technique, I'm speaking of the one you can measure when they are 3 or 4 years old, for that the riders can have an influence on the way the horses jumps, and the temperament are inheritable, and that they're part of the final results for more than 20%, where the environment goes for less than 80% in the final results. Where the breeding circumstance, the training circumstance, and the competing circumstance have nothing to see with the genetic. If your concurrence makes 4 foals and that drives you to the first place, you will earn more money, but that's not because of you. That's because of the competing circumstance. I know very well that because my wife bred a horse who ends up European champion, Crack Boom, because the horse who was on the lead and who was supposed to win had a knockdown on the first fence of the last phase. Thank you. What we know is that at the end, on the variability of the results, you can explain the variability at 80% was the environmental factor, and at 20% was the genetic factors. It's not a lot, but still, it's very important because was the same environment. If you get 10 horses with the same environment and give them the same circumstances, then the genetic will make the difference. Okay? And as one old farmer used to tell me, with horses, 2 + 2 never makes 4. But if you want to get 4, just try 3 + 3. Okay? So we go to the next. We have measured the inheritability of some factors which are measured in the competition for young horses, conformation show and free jumping show. We keep the marks for 50 years, and so we know the marks of the progeny of this and these stallions. So we have been able to measure the inheritability of those marks and end up with some characteristics which are very inheritable, some characteristics which are lightly inheritable, and some characteristic which has a poor inheritability. The neck, the mark of the neck, the stand of the neck, the head, is the mark is inheritable at 0.41. You consider it that everything above 0.2 is quite inheritable. When it's between 0.1 and 0.2, the heritability is low, but it still exists. Under 0.1, there's a criterion you can take as non-inheritable. So the stand of the forelegs, the top line wither, the stand of the hind legs, and what they give as a general impression, that's and 40%. So those are marks where you can work with. The elegancy, which is also related to the neck, are also inheritable. What the joints, the conformation of the forelegs, the conformation of the hind legs, especially the stand of the legs, have a low inheritability. We keep them as a criterion in our program because they are determinants together with the environment for the sport career of the horse. So a horse with a weak joints, if he doesn't get the proper environment, will get lame faster than a horse with strong joints. So we take those ones into consideration, but not as inheritable factor. A horse which is open in the front might produce horses which are straight in the front. Also because those factors are extremely dependent of the environment. On the first 3 months of his life, a foal has the legs which are a gummy. You can easily fix almost all the problem. Ask the people of the thoroughbreds. They can fix a lot of problem of the stand on the legs on the first 3 months. So pay attention to that, but don't think that because this horse is very straight, it's going to produce only very correct in the legs. And don't condemn a very interesting stallion which is open in the front left, because it doesn't mean that it's going to pass this characteristic. Okay? So, inheritability of the gaits. That's a general mark. We're going to talk about balance, amplitude, straightness, but on the competition, conformation and free jumping, they end up with one mark, general mark of the gait. This general mark of the gait is inheritable, not extremely, but the trot, that's important for the dressage people, is a bit more inheritable than the canter and the walk, but still the three of them are inheritable enough so that we can work with these characteristics. Remember, working is trying to achieve this 3 + 3. That will be our aim, to jump. The parameters of the jump. When the horse are evaluated on a free jumping competition, like you're going to have next week, I think. I do a little bit publicity for your show. The balance, the scope, the jumping technique, and the impression of blood, and which is modern. I don't like the name of intelligence. Don't try to have the horse too clever, because if they're too clever, they won't work for you. They'll, but say the cooperation of the horse with you, they're all inheritable, especially the scope. Okay, so we can work with those parameters. So 80% environment, 20% genetic. Does it worth to pay attention to these parameters? Shall we give up with the evaluation, or shall we go ahead with the evaluation? That's the question for all the stud books, because that's quite expensive to organize. So my answer is no, we should not give up. Because first, preparing this evaluation, like the evaluation of today or the evaluation in free jumping next week, is a part of the educational process of your horse. By this time, you will have to launch him, you will have to prepare him, you will have to learn him how to get in the lorry, out of the lorry, to get bridled. So that's part of the educational process. And for the ones who want to sell their product, that's a part of the promotional process. Because when you are a buyer, you rather go to the show than going from farm to farm where you don't know in which condition you will be able to evaluate the horses. We should not give up, because the evaluation helps to make a global prediction per groups of individuals. What we have realized, and we'll be back on that later on the speech, is that groups of horses which have been marked with a good marks in the general impression or good marks in the strength will have a better average result than the group of the one which has a low mark. So this evaluation is not a perfect individual prediction, but it's a very good group evaluation. This evaluation, if you go carefully to the sheet with the marks of your horse, will help you to get the most appropriate training program. You do not train a horse which is a late-growing horse as a small horse which is ready in his body to work as a 3 years old. You will not train a horse which is in a very square silhouette the same way than a horse with a very rectangular silhouette. You're not going to train a horse with a very good balance than a horse which is downhill. So this evaluation and these marks coming from people from outside should and can help you to find the appropriate training. The fourth reason to go ahead with this evaluation is that the effort of the group by evaluating the first progenies of a young stallion, which give early information on the production of this stallion, and will tell you quickly whether it's interesting to go ahead with him or not. We as a GFE, we produce like 3 or 4 new stallions every year. And we end up with 1 fitting our program every other year. So we know that when we start with 6, 1 will be really interesting. And they're hard to produce. So the fastest we know which one we want to keep, the more money we save and the more efficient we are in the genetic progress. And that's a team effort. And this evaluation can help you to faster evaluate whether a stallion is interesting or not, if he's passing or not, the qualities who can be useful for the sport. And maybe moreover, even if it's not pleased to end up fourth in a group of 5th, or worst, 82nd in a group of 90, but it helps you to compare with the others. You can disagree with the judge, but 98% of them will give you their sincere feeling. You can do whatever you want with it, but at least if you should have a look at the horses which were ahead of you. Why do they decide to give better marks to this one than to mine? It will help you to evaluate and reevaluate your own horses and make your decision for the future. So we go ahead with the evaluation. Now, how do we evaluate? Now, we move from the stud book program to what we decided to do with our company, GFE. And you can come to this little book when you leave, which is called the PAX program. The PAX program means a program to help you to cross the mare and the stallion. We have kept 21 criterions, which are in a table, and we work on those 21 criterions. It's 11 of conformation. The geometry, which is a square silhouette or rectangular silhouette. And if you go to the PAX program, if you go to the website, when you click, I think it's in English as well, when you click on the criterion, you will have the explanation of how to measure him. It's not a guess. It's all can be measured by eye evaluation or measurements, and for some of them by discussion with the rider or with the previous breeder. But the marks we're going to give on that, it's not a prediction of quality. It's just an evaluation of this single criteria. To make the measurement of the geometry, we make a vertical line from the ground to the point of the shoulder, another vertical line from the ground to the point of the buttock, and horizontal line level with the wither. And this ends up in a square or rectangle. And we measure the proportion between the height and the length, and it gives you an objective measurement. And we have very good jumpers with a square silhouette, Ito du Château, very good jumpers with a very rectangular silhouette, Ixted, but the measurement is objective. It's not I think he's rectangular. No, he is or he's not. The orientation is he uphill or downhill? Also a very precise measurement. You measure the size of the horse at the fifth thoracic vertebra, which is the point of the wither, and you measure the height of the horse at the sacroiliac joint, which you can see if you feel the vertebrae of your horse at the end of the back, and just before the sacrum you have a little hole. That's the sacroiliac joint. That's the last part of the vertebral column, which is flexible. And then the rest is solid. It's homoflexion. So we measure those two. If the wither is more than 3 centimeters higher than the sacroiliac, it's uphill. If it's more than 3 centimeters lower, it's downhill. And in between, you make the marks. And this is objective measurement. The head is the first subjective measurement. What is a nice head? If you ask the definition to a people who breed Arabian thoroughbreds, you will end up with a very different than if you ask the people who breed Lusitanians. So it's a question of matter. Okay, I like big eyes, which makes a large visual field. I like big ears, makes the information, the musical information more accessible. I like not the small mouths. And if the neck is long, I don't like too heavy heads because it's hard for them to move the head up. But the head is a matter of taste. To me, the good head is the head which will please to my client. When a horse goes out of the stall in front of the client or the judge, it's immediately a first impression. I like him, I don't like him. And this first impression is the eye and the head. And if the horse gives a good first impression, then the judge will say, I hope he's good as I feel. And if the head is ugly, he's waiting to confirm that the horse is as bad as he suspects. So that's the importance of the head. The neck. What's the use of the neck in the sport? We measure whether the neck is long or not. It's also a very objective measurement. It's from the top of the atlas vertebra to the center of the fifth cervical vertebra, which is not easy to point because it's some meat around. But if you go from the point of the shoulder direction to the wader from one hand, you're approximately in the center of the fifth cervical vertebra, and you measure this distance, and you report to the distance that goes from the top of the wader, all that is on the website, to the sacroiliac joint. And if the neck is longer for more than 7 centimeters than the back, we say it's a long neck. If it's shorter, more than 7 centimeters, it's a short neck. And then everywhere in between. That's a very objective measurement. And that's an important measurement because in the air, once the horse is off the ground with his 4 feet, he cannot add any propulsion. He just can transform his path. We'll go back to that with elasticity. He can just transform his path thanks to several tools which includes the back and the neck. If one is much more powerful than the other, it's more difficult to handle. So we like the back and the neck to be comparable. But it's an objective measurement. Same for the shoulder. The shoulder inclination, you have the axle from the point of the shoulder to the top of the weeder, measure to the vertical, it's an angle. You measure the angle, you end up with a score. The back line, it's the form of the line who goes from the sacroiliac to the base of the weeder. Is he going up or straight? And is it straight or hollow? And according to that, you give a score to the back line. The croup length is also an objective measurement. We measure the pelvis from the top of the hip till the middle of the buttock, which is, you have the articulation between the two muscles, and you measure that and you compare it to the size of the sacroiliac. Gives you an objective measurement, which has a relation with the jumping ability. We'll discuss that later. The croup orientation, you measure the axle of the pelvis compared to the horizontal. You have an angle, you end up with a mark. The bones is a visual impression, and you can measure the diameter of the bones under the knees, or you can give a visual impression. Is it a light bone or heavy bone? It's important because the relation between the bones and the joints is quite strong, and the relation between the bones and the weight is quite strong. And you want them strong enough so that the joints are strong enough, but you don't want any extra kilos of bones because they don't help to jump. And the size is also, it's like the head. Some people like small horses, some people like the big horses. For the sport, we like horses with the big strides. And you can have horses with a small size and big strides, and big horses with small strides. But the size, it's a factor. You have people who says, I don't want to sit on a horse which is less than 165 or which is more than 170. So the size is one of these conformation factors, and is inheritable, that we kept in our program. Then the gaits. We went quickly through the inheritability of the gaits, but the two we keep in our program, because they are related to the jumping ability, is the walk and the counter. The walk is the looseness of the walk, and the counter is the balance and the range of the strides. Thus, you can measure. This is not very easy. You can measure by your eye, or you can measure also precisely. It's very easy for the amplitude of a counter. You take a big ring like that. You ask the rider to make normal strides, not exaggerating, 370 meters per minute, which is the speed of a normal gallop in a competition. And you count the first time the horse is putting his left foot on the right lane. You count 10 times the left foot, measure the distance between the 10, you have the average strides of the size of the strides. So you can make an objective measurement. Same for the walk. Balance of the counter is a bit complicated. There's the time of the suspension, which is related to the balance. The eye impression is acceptable, and the tide of suspension you can only measure if you make a video and you go in a slow motion and you measure the tide where the 4 foot are off the ground compared to the tide where one of the 4 is on the ground. So you can go quick with a visual impression. If you are a very well scientist, you can go with a chronometer and those things. Jumping technique, foreleg, how quick and how far can the knee go ahead of the shoulder. Back leg technique, how is he gonna open in his jump and use his hind legs to go a little bit further to the fence. Elasticity. Elasticity, remember, the horse has 2 engines to go in the air. The front engine, which is the shoulders. If you have ever seen a horse free jumping, when he's hitting the ground with his forelegs, his weeder will go down between his omoplates from 3 to 8 centimeters. And these muscles who links the omoplate to the thorax will help the rebound. And this is the front engine. The hind engine is when this, these three lines of the pelvis, the femur and the tibia, will open by the contraction of the muscles and push him in the air. So you have a certain power, but once those 4 feet are off the ground, the power, which is related with the flight time, is determined. So you know that you're going to be in the air for 0.75 seconds or 1.2 seconds or whatever, and you cannot fix that. It's done. The horse has decided to put that much power in this particular jump. Now, the only thing he can correct is the form of the pass. If he's suddenly in the air, go further. To go further, he will have to lose altitude and use his additional motors. His additional motors are the neck, the knees, the sacroiliac, and the ox. You all have seen this horse pulling the hind legs in the middle of an ox hair and realizing, this is an additional motor. Those are the 4 additional motors, and it depends on the brain of the horse to make a good or a bad use of that. This is inheritable. This used to be useful for the sport of yesterday. This is extremely useful for the sport of today. So that's very important criteria. And the strength, there's the ability to produce a lot of horsepower to pull the 4 feet off the ground. It's not easy to measure. It's not easy to measure. It's not related to the amount of muscles. It's related to the tonicity of the muscles. And to judge that, it's a bit tricky, but what you can do is just make the horse comfortable in free jumping with a fence or 3 fences, and then change the distance or make an ox hair wider and see if the horse is using his elasticity to achieve a jump or just goes in the air a little bit more. And then you can see if he has a reserve of strength or if he has to use his additional motor. This is not the easiest, but as we have seen before, is inheritable. So we have to give a mark on that. And temperament, blood, carefulness, and braveness. It's a lot of studies getting carried on objective measurements of temperament, and probably will. Everybody has his own definition of the blood. Mine is how can a horse react quickly to a stimulus and consistently during all the working session. If you're working 20 minutes, will he produce the same answer to you at the beginning and at the end? Carefulness. We mean natural carefulness. How scared is a horse to touch the fence? And if he touches the fence, how long will he exaggerate his reaction not to do it again? And braveness, as we have seen today some horses which were more brave than careful, some of them more careful than brave. You're always more one than the other. At one time you will say, I'd rather stop than make a mistake, or I'd rather make a mistake than make an effort. So you cannot have the highest mark in carefulness and braveness, but they're both important. Carefulness to be placed, braveness to give the smile to the rider because you have achieved a nice course. Those are the 21 criterions. How can we work with those criterions to predict the ability to jump? For every criterion, that was the most difficult part of the program, and that's the originality. We decided that for every mark, it's not a perfect score. If it was an ideal score for every mark, we will have all the horses looking like each other. But it's still an area of marks which determine a population, and the population which has a mark for this criterion in the green area, what we call the desirable area, has a better chance to produce good performers than the group of horses which are marked out of these marks. So it's, in French we say parti pris, it's a decision that we've made. This is the comfort area. More or less than those scores. It's compatible with high performance, but the probability is higher to perform well for the horses in this group than for the horses on that group. That's the key of the program. Then, so for every of the 21 characteristics, the green area became yellow. Sorry. Like the geometry, we don't want it too square, but we don't want it over rectangular. If you want to, we can go further in the discussion on every other criteria. We can do it through the questions later on, or you can also find our justification of these marks on the website. But geometry, not too square, not too rectangular. Not too downhill, not too uphill. Too downhill will affect the balance, too uphill will require too much power from the hide engine. They're like that in dressage. In show jumping, not that much. The head is a matter of taste, and we see horses performing with every kind of head. So we are happy with all heads. That's important for commercial purpose. That's why he stays here. Length of the neck, not too short, not too long. The shoulder must be as oblique as possible. The wheel not too short, not too long, because it determines the place of the saddle. Straight line, also not too hollow, not too straight. The croup, the longest is the best, the pelvis. The longest is the best. The angle of the pelvis, not too horizontal, not too vertical. Back to geometry. When you have a triangle, pelvis, femur, and tibia. When the horse jumps, this will open. And the opening of this angle will determine the propulsion. If the pelvis is very horizontal, the power of the propulsion will be more vertical and less horizontal. If the pelvis is very oblique, the opening will be very efficient horizontally, a little less vertically. That's why we like the croup to be as long as possible and not too oblique and not too straight. The bones, as we said, must be related to the body, not too strong because it's too heavy, and not too light because it can drive to weak joints. All sides are good. Walk must be as flexible and as balanced as possible and as long as possible. The forelegs must be as quick as possible. The arch of the hind legs must be good arch, but not extremely good arch, because when the arch comes too efficient, the landing of the horse comes too vertical, which is damaging the joints and affecting the balance on the two strides after the jump. So too much of a good arch might be a little too much. Elasticity. We like elasticity, so we don't want them stiff, but we don't want them extremely elastic, because the elasticity comes on top of the power. If they are too elastic, they'll twist instead of going in the air. So you want them first go in the air and then be elastic. The scope as much as possible. Blood. For the one who doesn't hear, blood is like money. You can make a misuse, but you can't have too much. Willingness and braveness and carefulness, the more you have, the best it is. So that's how we determine what we call the desirable zone. And now, according with the steer and the mam, if you cross a mam with a mark of 1.5, with the sire with a mark of 2, and if you have 100 progeny, all their marks will be distributed something related to a gauge curve, not exactly, but close to a gauge curve, which is, as I speak, in the middle of the marks of the two. And you can predict this repartition and put the repartition with the desirable zone. And you see that with the mark of 1.5 in carefulness for the mare and 2 was the stallion, you have like 70-75% chance to end up in the desirable zone for the progeny, which means that you can still have a very careful mare with a reasonably careful horse ending up in a careless. It's mathematics, the 2 + 2 never makes 4. Okay? If the marks of the mare and the sire are very close from each other, the girth cause will be thinner and higher. When the marks are very extremely different, the girth cause will be slower and wider. And with these marks, between the parents and close between the parents, we determine the reliability of our prediction. For example, if you want to achieve a horse of 1.65 m, and if you cross a father of 1.67 m with a dam of 1.63 m, you will end up 165 with a close distribution. Not that many of them will be less than 60 or more than 70. But if you close a mare with 155 with a stallion of 175, you will also end up with an average of 165, but a bit of everything in between. So the reliability of the prediction has to see with the distance of the marks between the mare and the stallion. In other terms, when you want to reinforce one characteristic of your mare, use a stallion which has the same marks. If you want to change drastically the characteristic of your mare, use a stallion which have extreme marks on the other side. The reliability of the results is not 100%, but you will improve this parameter faster. That's why, parentheses, I insist in all this week, I like stallions with extreme marks. Even if they are too extreme for their own career in show jumping, they are very useful for you as a breeders. So we determined the compatibility with the surface of the under the ghost curve, which is in the green area and out. So you can see that for the hind leg technique, the sire 1 has only 15% compatibility, where the sire 2 has 80% compatibility. Then the program can be used on 2 ways. We're going to make a short demonstration at the end of how it works. You can choose a stallion. You say, okay, with my mare, I don't know whether I want to use Calvaro or Candide Nantuelle. I'll ask the program what's the compatibility with both of them. Or I have no idea of which stallion I'm going to use. Would you please suggest me the stallions with the highest compatibility with my mare? And then the program will tell you, okay, those are the most reliable in the results. Those are the most compatible in the results. So with all the criteria you have filled, what's the average compatibility? So the average chance that you end up with the marks in the green area. And then you can go ahead. If the stallion you had in mind is here, you can go for him. If he's not, you can go for him and another one from this list. The way you go for the final choice is on the next slide, I think. So you end up with Biscay Baloo. He has a global morphology compatibility of 74%, which is close to 80% for the gaits and jumping, and 60% for the parameters, for the other parameters. So morphology 74, gaits and jumping technique, and the others is blood, power, blood, carefulness, and willingness. And the total compatibility is 73. You'll see if we go, can we go back to the one before? 74 and 70, that's very close. It just gives you some ideas. If you want to go further, you have to go to the next step. And the next step is that one. You ask the compatibility between stallion 1 and your mare, and you will see for all the criteria you have filled, you don't need to fill all the criteria. You can work only with 2 or 3 criteria. If you say my concern is only the inclination of the shoulder and the carefulness and the elasticity, you just use these 3 marks, and the program will answer you with these 3 marks. If you want to use all of them, it will answer you with all of them. But all the marks that you have given for your mare, you will appear with this graphic and say that this is a quite, it's actually a very good compatibility. Be careful with the carefulness and be a little bit careful with the geometry shape. But this is an excellent compatibility. And you can have the same results of average compatibility with 9 of the 10 criteria you feel completely in and 1 completely out. Then you might say, okay, I better think about it because it's very compatible, but I have a big risk with the size, or I have a big risk with the neck length, which I don't want. So that's why you should never stop on the percentage of compatibility, but go to the total, what we call the graphic restitution. It will attract your attention on what's suitable, what's risky, and what's not desirable. When the reliability is higher, you already had that. If you want to stay close to the characteristic of your dam, use a stallion which has the same characteristic, because the risk is very low that you go far from the characteristic of the dam. Where when you want to improve, you will improve by using the extreme, but don't blame me or don't blame the program if you don't end up with, it's like if you put ice cube in a hot water, if you measure the temperature after 2 hours, so after 10 generations, you'll have the same temperature everywhere in the glass. If you measure the temperature close to the size of close to the ice cube, which is disappearing under warm water, you will have 2 different results. That's the reliability of the measure. You can use it the other way around. On the program, you can create your space and enter all your mares. And now you say, I want to use, in this example, Balou Durway. Which one of my mares has the highest compatibility with him? So you use the reverted program, and it'll give you that this mare, Absolument Spécial, has a conformation compatibility of 73 and ends up with 83% compatibility, where Dasha Denatim will end up only with 71. So you will know which one of your mares probably suits the best. Never stop there. Always go to the graphic restitution just to check that is not one of the criteria which is completely out. But that helps you to choose a mare for the stallion you decided to use. Actually, the program only works with our stallions, and it's not our intention to introduce the stallion of our concurrents in him. First, because they won't be very pleased if we give marks on their stallion. And second, we doesn't want you to be able to use the stallions of our concurrents. Or we don't, we'll help you for that. Okay? Little tips. Do not focus only on the digital restitution, the average compatibility. Always analyze the graphic restitution criterion per criterion. And think on your mare first. That's where the evaluation of the conformation shows or the free jumping shows are important. What does my mare as a strong point that I want to preserve or reinforce? What does she needs to be improved? What needs to be improved with her? And then question the program with only the strong points. My mare is brave, careful, with a good shoulder. And I want to keep that. What are the stallions which will reinforce that, which have close marks to her for that? You will have a list of stallions appearing. Then away and start again only with the weak points. She's stiff and no scope. Which are the stallions who will reinforce the elasticity and the scope? Then both. Then everything, all the available criteria that you have. And hopefully you will have 1 or 2 stallions which will appear in every of these 4 groups of research. And those ones are the ones you should focus on. And if you have already selected 3 or 4 stallions, you can ask the program only to answer you on those 3 or 4 stallions. You can make your own choice of stallions. in the program. And the program, of course, has a limit. The limit is that it doesn't take into consideration the genealogy. So you might end up with a daughter of Canaan, very compatible with Canaan. Don't do it. Doesn't take into consideration the palmarès and the progeny. The palmarès will help you maybe to give some marks on the carefulness or on the scope, and will help you to sell. And the results of the other progeny will help you to give the marks on your mare, because you can have a small mare who produce size, then you will give her a mark on the size which is a little higher than what she has. That's what we do with our stallions. Every year we have a one-day work where we review all the marks of all our stallions according with what we have seen from the progeny. Doesn't take into consideration the celebrity of the stallion. If you want to produce a horse for yourself, you don't care. If you want to produce a horse to sell as a foal or as a 3-year-old, yeah, some breedings will tell more than some others on the ear of the buyers. Doesn't take the coat color, doesn't take the fertility, doesn't take the breeding price, and doesn't take your feeling. Which at the end, the program will help you to find the 2 or 3 more desirable stallions for your mare. Not the one who will produce the champions, but the one who will give to a potential champion the best comfort to express his ability. And at the end, it's your feeling to decide whether you go for Hokkaido or Helios. They are very close from each other. There are 2 stallions of our program, and they quite often appear both in the same list. One is a Cornet of Volensky, is a grandson of Clinton as well, but with another approach, and it's a question of feeling. So the feeling is important, because at least if he ends up with not the expected results, it's because you had a bad feeling. So, before birth, so making the choice of a stallion is extremely difficult to see what the ability to perform will be. And that's the aim of the PAX program. Once the foal is born, the PAX can't do anything. The foal is born. It's very difficult, but you can start to see if its criteria are in the desirable zone or not. It's not very easy until 3 years. At 3 years, you can start to give the parameters of the free jumping ability, and if they show scope, elasticity, good harsh, good front technique, you can say that the chance that he's going to be good performer are increasing. It's quite easy when there are 6, easy when there are 9, 8, and when they're finished, it's very easy to see what it was, like the arrival of the race. It's very predictable that this one was going to win, but not when they were in the starting gates. The PAC system doesn't help to predict the ability, but increase the chance that this horse will have the conformation, gaits, jumping technique, and temperament that will help him to express his predisposition with a maximum of comfort. And I think that's the end of the story, which now opens the discussion.
Can I start up with 2 questions from online?
Yes?
Okay, the first question goes back to, I think, right at the very beginning of the slideshow where you discussed that it was 80% environment, 20% genetics. And she says, do you think the 80-20 ratio of environmental to genetics will change as genetics and knowledge of breeding continue to improve?
So the question is, tell that for the other people following on the internet. The question is, will the ratio 20% inheritability, 80% environmental factor will change in favor of inheritability in the future thanks to the improvement of the genetic? My answer is unfortunately probably not. The only way to slow down the part of environment will be to control better the environment and to give exactly the same environment to a maximum of horses so that environment will not make the difference. We are very far from that. And even if we get closer from that, studies carried on the dairy production or on the meat production of cattle shows that when you put them in the same environment, still the key role of their environment is higher than the genetic. And in the dairy production, the environment goes with the control of the temperature, the quality of the food, and all the factors which will make that a cow which has the potential to produce 14,000 liters milk will reach the 12,000 or the 13,000 or the 13,500. And to explain the difference in those results between selected cows and a proper environment, still the environment is close to 70% of the difference. So we really work on those 3+3 basis with a lot of humility, because we know that the chance of the horse to perform starts when the mare is pregnant. So after you've made the choice of the 3+3 or the 1+1. And it starts with the quality of the feeding of the mare, the environment of the mare during the gestation, and so on and so on and so on, up to will your concurrents will knock down a pool at the barrage of the final jump of the European Championship. Okidoki was his name. I thank him every morning. And that has nothing to see with Clark Boom himself. So no, the part of the environment will stay determinant. But it's not an excuse not to try to start with the best possible material. You can also compare with wine. You are in a wine country, yeah? You have the grapes, and you collect the grapes and make your wine. You have the grapes. The nature has done its job. Some years are better than others, but then you can do only mistakes. Bad temperature with the vinification, bad tank to store the wine, problem with the cork, temperature during the transport, bad temperature of conservation, drinking with the wrong meal, drinking with the wrong people. You can only do mistake. You can only do mistake and damage what the nature gave to you. Same with the horses. And all the damage that the nature can give to ends up as very important. But still at the beginning, give the same treatment to a poor wine and a good wine. The good wine will stay better at the end.
Ones, I think, in terms of scope and
Yeah.
bravery and that, or carefulness. And you mentioned about discussions with the rider and the breeder on
Yeah.
some of these items. And they're saying, could this not be biased? And how much does that factor into your decision regarding the grade that you ultimately give those horses?
So the next question is, how can we be precise, realistic, and objective with the criterions which are hard to measure objectively? The answer is we can't. We are not the best judge of our horses. So when I ask on the telephone, a breeder calls me and he says, what do you suggest for my mare? Is she careful? Yes, extremely careful. Is she scopy? Oh, extremely scopy. I'll say, then you can use this stallion. And the week after you see the rider, I say, what about this mare? Jesus, she will be wonderful, but she has a heart like that. So you're not the best judge of your horse. And for those subjective criterions, ask your neighbor, your vet, your rider, your mom, anyone else to give you a second opinion. And the second opinion will probably be closer to the reality than your opinion, because you're looking with the heart. So definitely you need somebody else's opinion for the hard to measure criterions.
That's all the questions we have online. I'm not sure if there's any.
Getting close to the end. Yeah.
I might have missed it, but the criteria of strength, where it was scopy versus non-scopy. I didn't understand that measurement. What is scopy versus non-scopy?
As scope is the ability of the horse to develop an amount of horsepower. How long can he make his flight? We have equipped some horses in France in a free jumping competition with a little machine which measures exactly the time of the pass between the moment where the hind legs are leaving the ground to the moment that the front legs are coming on the ground. And we ended up with a correlation between this objective measurement and the final score of the general impression of quality on the jump. So we need scope. They are not easy to measure, but that's the ability to produce energy to go in the air. It also is very related to environment. A horse with a proper work, like I used to have more scope to run fast or get the ball when I was 20 than today. But at one time, you can try to have indirect measurements. The riders can give you the feeling, I can jump everything, or I better be organized because my time flight will be just about to cover the fence. But that's not easy to measure. We are working on tools. Yeah.
And how do you measure the bone score, like bone weight? Is that a DEXA scan or something like that?
No, that's it used to be till the recent past, the KWPN was making the circle of the cannonball under the knee, and you had a relation between that and the weight of the skeleton. Today is a eye impression. The horse, when the horse jumps, the joints, which are very related, the quality of the joints with the length of the career of the horse, the joints will suffer two kind of pressures. Active pressure, which are the pressure, for example, that are on the ankles of the hind legs when the horse hits on. He will determine the pressure he can support. And passive pressure, that's where when he lands. According with the pass at the landing moment, his elasticity, the pressure will be, but he cannot control that. It depends on his body, of the horsepower, and of the form of the pass, and he will suffer a pressure. This pressure will be supported by the tendons, the ligaments, and the joints. The conformation, that's things that we haven't put in the program because it will be too complicated. The stand of the legs, and especially the suspension of the ankles is very important at that point, because that's the key of the repartition of the pressure between the articulations and the tendons and ligaments. Not enough suspension will drop too much of the pressure on the ligaments, and it will make the vet happy because he will have to fix the tendons problems. Very straight stand of the fetlocks will determine more pressure on the joints, and it will make the vet happy because you will have the arthrosis problem. And it's a physics, but the amount of surface of the joints in relation with the pressure will determine the pressure per square millimeter or square centimeter. So you like joints with enough surface. And generally the surface of the joints is linked with the size of the bones. So that's why you don't want too small bones, because it will determine it too small. I'm simplifying, but will determine it too small joints and too much pressure on them. And if you wanted the joints to be very large and heavy, you will end up with a heavy skeleton, which is that more to push in the air, because also back to mathematics, the time of the flight will be a correlation between the horsepower and the weight of the horse. Yeah?
Going back to scope and measuring scope, I know you say it's difficult all the time. Do you measure scope when a horse is free jumping? Because can the rider affect the horse's scope with training and level of jumping?
It's a good question. The answer is the first measurement we make of the scope is in a free jumping competition. And in free jumping competition, the training before the competition is determinant. You cannot ask the same effort to a horse who has jumped 3 times in his life compared to another one which has had 6 months of clever preparation. That you put the question, and when we make the selection for the sales, that's the first thing we ask the breeder: how many times has he jumped? And according to that, you will change a little bit your marks, but that's the first impression. The point the rider can provide is 2 points he can provide. First, his first impression, because he will feel with that more than I can feel with that on how many horsepower is seated. He will feel that, and he can give you an impression. And you should take into consideration the opinion of the rider on the natural scope of the horse that he can already feel on jumping 80 centimeters. And then the ability of the horse with the training to develop its horsepower production is also very important. But to measure the development of the production thanks to the rider is not inheritable. What is inheritable is the natural. So let's say, to be scientific, we should say, okay, we all jump them 6 times. We all evaluate the strength, the scope, after the 6th time free jumping. Then we put the same rider on the 10 of them and ask him to give the marks on his feeling on the pole. It's never like that. That's why it's not easy. But the parameters you have to take into consideration to give the marks of scope is the one you can see when they are young.
So if I was to pick a stallion that for my mare who needs scope, would I wait to see if that stallion's scope stays the same during his competition or gets better or worse?
Then you won't use young stallions. So I think, and you see the correlation between the scope and the final results in the sport by the length of the pass measure with this machine is quite good. I think that the impression you can have is a free jumping. You can make a group, very scopy, reasonably scopy, lack of scope. You cannot say this one has more scope than that one, but you can put them in 4 groups and use the scopy one. If you want to add scope, use the scopy one as fast as you can. If you go to our website and if you go to see our young stallions, you will have somewhere a video of them free jumping. And you will see we have 3 young stallions. One is in the scopiest, and you will immediately notice. So I don't need to tell you. Yeah? In a? Sorry. The inheritability of? Yeah.
Have you measured that?
It has been measured, but, well, the question for internet, sorry, the question is the inheritability of the quality of the hoof. It has been measured. I don't have the results with me because it's not been marked in the competition conformation of young horses. That's actually here in Brazil, where I see those judges lifting the foot of the horse, evaluating the quality. Probably because we don't have that much problems now with that. But I don't have the marks of inheritability. Anyway, it's not going to be huge. It's like the stand of the legs probably, and it's something, okay, it's a part of inheritability, but that the farrier can fix at a very young stage. But I'm sorry, I have no precise answer for that. About the? Chic. Oh, elegance. Sexy. The chic. What is the chic? Yeah, you can. Chic is elegant.
I've got another question from online. It says, do you recommend breeding with stallions once they have competed or before they've competed? What do you think is the best for what age do you think is best for a stallion to begin breeding?
So the question is, what age should a stallion start to breed? And do you recommend to use young stallion rather than old stallions? And general point of view, if you believe in the genetic improvement, you should use the stallions the quickest possible. Don't be scared that it's a risk. Yes, it's a risk. But every single Provence stallion from Chaco Blue to Cornet Obolensky has been a young stallion. And he became known because breeders has made the effort to use them as the young stallions. And they were the best rewarded because they were the first one to benefit to the improvement. It's a risk, and as a stallion and mares with stallions which are in their first 3 years of breeding career. And the other 50 with horses that has proven their ability to pass the characteristics. And we use the one which have proven their ability to pass the characteristic to reinforce or fix the things we want to reinforce or fix with our mares. And when we're quite pleased with the marks of the mares, we are very happy to try them with the young stallions because we know that the genetic improvement is there. So go for the genetic improvement, go for the young ones, they're cheaper. And in the French stud book, where our aim is to have 30% of the mares covered with young stallions, we're not there yet, we're closer to 22, 23. We give a lot of encouragement to the breeders. We give a premium for them to participate to fall competitions so that they use the young stallions. When a group of breeders is going to use more young stallions than the other group of breeders, their herd of horses will develop and perform faster. That's for sure. It doesn't mean that every single one will do well. Some of the young stallions, as I told you, we have every year 3 or 4 new stallions. We just keep one out of the 6. So the other 5, they were good, but not really improvers. So some people will not benefit of this genetic progress. But still, take your chance. It's the best way that you're going to be the first one to have. What are the new stallions that you are producing? In GFE, in France, when you are clients with an old stallion, you can get the breeding of a new stallion for free. That's how we encourage breeders to use our young stallions, so that we know we need to have 100 foals on the ground to give a precise marks on the stallions. So the quickest we have these 100 foals, the happiest we are. But definitely, as a group of breeders, using the young stallion is a fruitful effort. Individually, it's a risk, but it's worth to take in.
I've got another question from online. It says you can have a horse with all the scope and ability, but how do you measure the bravery or the heart of the horse? Because you're lacking that.
The question is, you can have a horse which has all the scoop and the ability, but how can you measure the bravery or the carefulness? This is something that you can guess a little bit when they're young, but it's really something you measure when they are confronted to show that they are brave or willing to do well. And that's a mark that you guess at the beginning and that you confirm only when they are 6 or 7 years old. So those are the marks to change the most in our re-evaluation of the stallions every year. Because you can have horses which are very brave and breeding a little bit spooky, and horses a little bit spooky who can breed very brave. But the exact measurement of the bravery is when they are under saddle. Okay? Other questions? Yeah?
So you looked at a lot of different functions, different variables. Is there a single variable that had the highest correlation to success? Show jumping what was?
Is one variable out of the 21 who has a big relation with the performance or the improvement? And if so, which one it is? The answer is, if it was one, it would be only one criteria in the program. The most important is the one who need to be fixed. Probably that's why we recommend to use the program with the strong points you want to reinforce, and then with only the weak points you need to fix. And I used to say, go for the weak points, see which stallions are there. If out of the 21 criterions, it's 2 or 3 weak points, just work on those 2 or 3. If it's more than 3, call me, we'll change the mare. Okay? Yes, we're gonna now go to an example of how we can get the system working live. So we're on the website. We go on menu. we go on Pax graphic. Here we are. I've already created my account, so I'm on my account. Otherwise, you have to create your account. And then now we're going to add one mayor. I didn't store any mayors, but you can keep the records of your mayors. We'll add one mayor. We're going to call him Mom. She's, let's say, gray. She's born in 2000. And pair is dad, very original. Mary's mom. And surprisingly, Opa, there was Opa, that's Uma. Okay, we send this information to the system, and then the system will go to Envoyer. You have it in English as well, hopefully. So you send that, and confirm your country. He won't believe that I'm in France, but okay. Then you come to the marks, and you give your mayor the mark of, we'll start with some extreme marks. We go to extremely square, with a very short neck, very horizontal croup, go down, and a short counter. We just decide to mark the extreme characteristics. And we have semen of Candide de Nantuelle and Chacon Blue. I know the answer already. And we ask that to show the compatibility. And the program will show you parallel Candide and Chacon. So you see that for the form of geometry, Chacon will be better. That for the neck length, Chacon will be better. Okay, there are extreme characteristics. So it's not surprising that the compatibility is low. The croup orientation will be a real problem with Chacon, where it's going to be okay with, and the counter, both is even a little bit better with Candide, but still not perfect. Okay, you have your first series of answers. Then you go back. You can register or go to retour, yeah. And now we get more information that she's uphill, not extremely, a bit less. Okay, thanks God, because if she's square and downhill, that is a little bit trendy in the head. Give the marks you like. So, and you can give all the marks on you can also stay here. You can just click on it and stay here at 2.5. Okay, length of the croup and top line and bones and size. You have a little information on the gates because it's a young filly out of the field. And let's send. You go to suivant. Choisir un étalon. And back to Candide and Chacon. And you can go further in the analyze that way. You can also put all the criteria. So you see that Candide has a 53% compatibility, Chacon 49. You think it's very low, so return.